The chamber was massive, built from materials that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Colonel Sarah Chen stood in the center of a circular platform, surrounded by towering figures from 47 different alien civilizations. Some had scales, others had crystalline bodies that hummed with inner light. A few were barely visible, existing as clouds of organized particles. They all stared down at her with expressions she couldn't fully read, but the hostility was universal enough. She wore her dress uniform, the blue fabric crisp and decorated with medals from conflicts these beings had never heard of. Her hands were clasped behind her back, her spine straight. She had faced enemy fire before. This was just another kind of battlefield. High Magistrate Velthor rose from the highest seat. The crystalline being's body refracted the dim light into rainbow patterns across the chamber walls. When it spoke, the voice seemed to come from everywhere at once, translated instantly into her earpiece. Colonel Sarah Chen of the species known as humanity. You stand before the Galactic Council to answer for severe violations of the established codes of warfare. Your species has been part of our collective for only 50 standard cycles, yet you have managed to break more sacred laws than any civilization in recorded history. Sarah said nothing. She had been advised to remain silent until directly questioned. Velthor's body pulsed with what might have been anger. The charges are extensive. During the recent conflict with the Crethean swarm, human military forces violated 127 articles of the Geneva Conventions of Galactic Warfare. These conventions have maintained peace and order for 12,000 cycles. A holographic display materialized in the air above Sarah's head. Images began to play. Human soldiers in combat armor, firing weapons at rates that seemed excessive to the Council. Soldiers laughing as they advanced through a battlefield. Close-quarters combat with knives and improvised weapons. Ambushes. Night raids. Psychological warfare broadcasts. You deployed kinetic weapons with no yield limitations, Velthor continued. You refused to honor the mandatory evacuation periods before engagement. You conducted ambushes outside of designated combat zones. You used psychological attacks designed to induce fear and panic. You engaged in close-quarters violence when ranged combat would have sufficed. Most disturbing of all, your soldiers displayed enthusiasm during battle. They laughed, they sang. They celebrated violence. Commander Jack Thar, a reptilian being with green scales and golden eyes, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Sarah noticed. She had met Jack Thar before, during the planning sessions for the Crethean campaign. He had lost his homeworld's outer colonies to the swarm before human forces arrived. Another council member stood. This one was from the Praetorian Dominion, a species that prided itself on military tradition. War Master Thane's forearms crossed over his armored chest. The humans fight like animals. They have no concept of honor, no respect for the ancient ways. They turn warfare into butchery. We won, Sarah said quietly. The chamber fell silent. Velthor's crystal body flashed bright red. You were not given permission to speak. You asked me here to answer charges, Sarah replied, her voice steady. I'm answering, we won. The Crethean swarm was defeated in 6 months. How long had they been advancing before we arrived? Jackthar spoke up, his voice rough. 3 years. We lost 7 colony worlds, 42 billion souls. The Colonel will have her opportunity to speak, Velthor said. But first she must understand the severity of her species' actions. The Council has reviewed extensive evidence. Human forces ignored every principle of civilized warfare. You treated war as if it were a matter of survival rather than honor. Sarah almost laughed but caught herself. Because it was a matter of survival. Silence. Velthor's voice boomed. Your barbaric approach to combat may have achieved short-term results, but at what cost? You have corrupted the very nature of warfare itself. Young species look to humanity now and see that victory can be achieved through savagery. You have undone 12,000 years of civilized progress. The holographic display shifted, showing more footage. A human sergeant, his armor scorched and damaged, planting a flag on a Crethean nest ship. His helmet was off and he was grinning. In the background, other soldiers were securing the area with ruthless efficiency. No ceremony. No formal declarations. Just the brutal simplicity of a mission completed. This sergeant, Velthor said, led a team that eliminated an entire Crethean command structure in a single night operation. No formal challenge was issued. No opportunity for honorable surrender was given. He and his team simply attacked in the darkness, killed the enemy leadership, and withdrew. This is not warfare. This is assassination. That sergeant saved an entire planet, Sarah said. The Crethians were preparing a spore bombardment that would have killed every living thing on the surface. Sergeant Rodriguez's team stopped it. By breaking every established rule of engagement, Thane growled. By doing what needed to be done, Sarah countered. Velthor's body dimmed to a deep purple. The council must vote on appropriate sanctions. Humanity could face military restrictions, technology embargoes, or complete quarantine from galactic society. Some members have suggested classification as a Category 9 threat species. Sarah felt her stomach tighten. Category 9 meant Earth would be isolated, potentially blockaded. No trade, no cultural exchange. Humanity would be treated as a danger to be contained rather than an ally. However, Velthor continued, in recognition of your recent first contact status, the Council will allow you to present a defense. You have 48 standard hours to prepare your case. Use this time to consider what you will say. We have all witnessed the evidence of human brutality. You will need to provide extraordinary justification for your species' actions. The platform beneath Sarah's feet began to descend, carrying her out of the chamber. She maintained her composure until she was in the corridor outside, surrounded by her small team of advisors and military liaisons. Well, General Marcus Webb said as they walked toward their assigned quarters. That went about as well as expected. Webb was a broad man with gray hair and a face that had seen too many battles. He had commanded human forces during the Crethian campaign from the fleet carrier Indomitable. He was the one who had given the order to ignore galactic warfare protocols and fight to win. They're going to vote to isolate Earth, one of the diplomatic aides said, his voice shaking. We're finished. No, Sarah said firmly. We're not. We just need to make them understand. Understand what? The aide asked. That we're better at killing than they are? That we don't care about their rules? Sarah stopped walking and turned to face her team. We need to make them understand that their rules were designed for a galaxy at peace. We come from a world that has never known true peace. We learned to fight because we had no choice. And when we came here and saw how they were losing to the Crethians, we knew exactly what the problem was. What problem? The aide asked. They were trying to fight a war with rules designed for honor duels, Webb said, understanding dawning in his eyes. They were treating an existential threat like a sporting match. Sarah nodded. Exactly. And in 48 hours, we're going to teach them the difference between fighting to look noble and fighting to survive. We're going to show them why humanity wrote our own rules for warfare. Rules that actually work. She looked back toward the chamber, where the council was no doubt already discussing Earth's fate. She thought about the billions of humans back home, unaware that their future in the galaxy hung in the balance. She thought about Sergeant Rodriguez and thousands of soldiers like him who had done what needed to be done, without hesitation or apology. Let's get to work, she said. We have a species to save. 6 months earlier, the situation had been desperate. Commander Jackthar stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the holographic display as another colony fell to the Crethian swarm. The insects moved like a living wave across the planetary surface, consuming everything in their path. Sound the evacuation alert, he ordered, his voice heavy with defeat. All civilian vessels have 72 hours to depart. His tactical officer looked confused. Commander, the Crethians are advancing now. They won't wait for the evacuation period to end. The rules of honorable warfare require a 72-hour evacuation window, Jackthar said. We must observe the protocols. The Crethians don't care about protocols, sir. Jackthar knew this. Everyone knew this. The Crethian swarm was a hive mind species that had emerged from the galactic rim 6 years ago. They consumed biomass to grow their numbers and showed no interest in communication or negotiation. They had no concept of surrender, no understanding of mercy. They simply spread and consumed. And yet the Galactic Defense Coalition continued to fight them according to the ancient rules. Formal challenges before engagement, designated combat zones to minimize collateral damage, restricted weapon yields to preserve infrastructure, mandatory pause periods for evacuation and prisoner exchange. The Crethians ignored every single rule and slaughtered millions because of it. When the Coalition finally called Earth for help, it was an act of desperation. Humanity had only been part of the galactic community for 3 years. They were considered primitive, barely advanced enough for first contact. Their military technology was crude compared to energy shields and plasma weapons, but they were available, and the Coalition was dying. General Marcus Webb had been in his office at Earth Strategic Command when the request came through. He reviewed the tactical reports with growing horror. "They're losing on purpose," he said to his staff officers. "Look at this. They have superior numbers, better technology, and total orbital control, but they're losing because they're following a rulebook written for peacetime games." Captain Sarah Chen, then a tactical analyst, pulled up the Galactic Warfare Conventions on her display. She read through them with increasing disbelief. "Sir, these aren't warfare rules. These are tournament regulations. Look at this one. All parties must agree to the location and time of engagement at least 48 hours in advance. How is that supposed to work against an enemy that doesn't communicate?" Webb shook his head. "It doesn't. These species have had peace for so long they've forgotten what real war looks like. They've turned combat into a ritual." "What do we do?" Chen asked. Webb stood and walked to the window overlooking the military complex below. Thousands of soldiers training, preparing, maintaining readiness for threats that might never come. Humanity had learned its lessons in blood. 2 world wars, countless smaller conflicts, the unification wars that had nearly destroyed their own planet. "We show them how humans fight," Webb said. "We throw out their rulebook and we win this war. Then we apologize later." The first human forces arrived in the combat zone 3 weeks later. Jack Thar met with General Webb and Colonel Chen aboard the Coalition flagship to coordinate strategy. "Our forces will deploy along the Western Front," Jack Thar explained, gesturing to the holographic map. "We will issue a formal challenge to the Krethian forces in that sector. Once they accept, we can begin the engagement after the mandatory preparation period." Webb stared at him. "They're not going to accept your challenge. They're insects. They don't have diplomats. Nevertheless, the conventions require—" "I don't care what the conventions require," Webb interrupted. "Where are the Krethians right now?" Jack Thar highlighted several areas on the map. "Their main force is here, advancing on the colony of Meridian Prime. They will reach the civilian population centers in approximately 10 days. Then we hit them tonight," Webb said. The bridge fell silent. "Tonight?" Jack Thar repeated. "But there has been no formal challenge, no designation of combat zones." No time," Webb finished. "Every day we waste on ceremony is another day those bugs get closer to civilians. We're going in tonight with full force. Orbital bombardment on their staging areas, followed by ground assault to mop up survivors. That is a violation of at least 15 articles of the Warfare Conventions." Jack Thar protested. "Yes," Webb agreed. "It is. File a complaint after we save your planet." The attack came at 0300 hours during the period that galactic forces traditionally used for rest and recuperation. Human warships dropped out of faster-than-light travel directly above the Krethian positions and opened fire immediately. There were no warnings, no challenges, no opportunities to retreat. The Krethians, used to the predictable patterns of coalition warfare, were caught completely off guard. Kinetic weapons traveling at relativistic speeds turned their staging areas into craters. Drop pods followed, carrying human Marines directly into the remaining Krethian positions. Sergeant David Rodriguez led his platoon through the smoking ruins of a Krethian nest structure. The insects were scrambling, trying to organize a defense. They weren't used to being the ones ambushed. "Contact front," someone shouted. Rodriguez's squad opened fire. They used ballistic weapons, ancient technology by galactic standards, but effective and reliable. When they ran low on ammunition, they switched to close combat. Knives, entrenching tools, whatever worked. One of the squad members started singing a cadence from basic training. Others joined in. It helped maintain rhythm during movement, kept morale up, and probably terrified the Krethians. Rodriguez didn't care which. It worked. Coalition observers watching from orbit were horrified. They saw human soldiers laughing as they fought. They saw brutal efficiency with no regard for honor or ceremony. They saw warfare stripped down to its fundamental purpose, destroying the enemy's ability to fight. By dawn, the Krethian advance on Meridian Prime had been stopped. The human casualties were minimal. The Krethian casualties were total. Jack Thar stood on the bridge of his flagship staring at the battle reports. "They killed them all," he said quietly. "No prisoners. No quarter given." "The Krethians don't take prisoners either," his tactical officer pointed out. "I know, but still, this is not how warfare should be conducted." Yet even as he said it, Jackthar felt something he hadn't felt in 3 years of fighting the swarm. Hope. Over the following months, human forces pushed the Creathians back. They used every tactic the coalition considered dishonorable. Ambushes, night raids, feints and deceptions, psychological warfare broadcasts that disrupted Creathian hive communication, orbital strikes with no regard for yield restrictions. Coalition military observers documented everything. Each violation of the warfare conventions was recorded. Each breach of protocol was noted. The evidence piled up, but so did the victories. Planets that had been given up for lost were liberated. Civilians who would have died were saved. The Creathian advance didn't just stop, it reversed. For the first time since the war began, the coalition was winning, and that made some people very uncomfortable. War Master Thane of the Praetorian Dominion watched the human tactics with disgust. His species had maintained military traditions for 8,000 years. They believed in honor, in face-to-face combat, in giving an enemy the chance to die with dignity. The humans gave the enemy nothing but death. This cannot continue, Thane said to his advisors. The humans are corrupting everything warfare is meant to be. They treat it like extermination. They are effective, one advisor noted carefully. Effectiveness is not the point, Thane roared. Any species can be effective if they abandon all honor and principle. The warfare conventions exist to prevent us from becoming monsters in the pursuit of victory. But the Creathians are not following our rules, yes. But the answer is not to abandon our rules. It is to fight harder while maintaining our principles. Otherwise, what separates us from them? Within weeks of the Creathian defeat, formal charges were filed against humanity. The evidence was undeniable. The violations were extensive. Earth would answer for its crimes against civilized warfare. General Webb received the summons with a grim smile. They're going to put us on trial for winning their war. Colonel Chen, promoted for her role in the campaign, shook her head. They're going to put us on trial for showing them what real war looks like. They're not ready to face that truth about themselves. Then we'll have to make them ready, Webb said. Because if we don't, the next time something like the Creathians shows up, they're all going to die politely following rules that don't matter. The preparation room was small and sterile, nothing like the grand chambers where the council met. Colonel Sarah Chen sat at a table surrounded by data pads, holographic displays, and historical records. General Webb paced behind her like a caged animal. We need to be careful, one of the diplomatic aides said. If we're too aggressive, we'll alienate moderate council members who might support us. If we're too soft, they'll think we're admitting guilt, Webb countered. Sarah looked up from the historical document she was reading. It was the actual Geneva Conventions from Earth, written in the aftermath of the Second World War. She had been comparing them to the Galactic Warfare Conventions all morning. We're not doing either, she said. We're going to teach them a history lesson. 48 hours later, Sarah stood once again on the circular platform in the council chamber. This time she had requested permission to present evidence. High Magistrate Velthor had agreed, though the crystalline being's body glowed with skeptical orange light. The council recognizes Colonel Chen, Velthor announced. You may present your defense. Sarah activated her personal holographic projector. Images appeared in the air above the chamber, visible to all council members. Thank you, Magistrate. Honorable council members, I want to begin by showing you something from my world's history. The hologram showed ancient battles, humans with spears and shields fighting in organized formations, then cavalry charges, musket lines, trenches filled with soldiers during the First World War, the massive tank battles of the Second World War, nuclear mushroom clouds, the orbital strikes of the Unification Wars. Humanity has been fighting wars for our entire existence, Sarah said. 10,000 years of recorded conflict, millions of battles, billions of casualties. We have tried every form of warfare imaginable. The images shifted to show peace conferences, signatures on treaties, the founding of international organizations. And through all of that violence, we learned something crucial. We learned that war needs rules, but those rules must serve a specific purpose. Sarah pulled up the Earth Geneva Conventions. The text appeared in translated form for each council member. These are our Geneva Conventions. They were created after the most devastating conflict in our history. Notice what they focus on: protection of civilians and non-combatants, treatment of prisoners of war, restrictions on weapons that cause unnecessary suffering, medical neutrality. She highlighted key passages. These rules exist to protect the innocent. They exist to maintain our humanity even in the midst of violence. They do not exist to make warfare honorable or ceremonial. They exist to limit its horror. War Master Thane stood. The Galactic Warfare Conventions serve the same purpose. Do they? Sarah challenged. She pulled up the Galactic Conventions beside Earth's. Your conventions require formal challenges before engagement, mandatory evacuation periods, designated combat zones, restricted weapon yields. These rules aren't about protecting civilians. They're about making warfare predictable and civilized. What is wrong with civilized warfare? Felthor asked. Nothing if your enemy agrees to be civilized, Sarah replied. But the Krethians didn't agree. They never would have agreed. They're a hive-mind species driven by biological imperatives. They don't have concepts of honor or ceremony. They have one drive: consume and expand. She changed the hologram to show footage from the Krethian War before human involvement. Coalition forces waiting the mandatory 72 hours for evacuation, while Krethians slaughtered fleeing civilians. Formal challenges broadcast into space, ignored as the swarm advanced. Designated combat zones bypassed as the insects attacked from unexpected directions. Your rules got people killed, Sarah said bluntly. 42 billion people died in 3 years because the coalition followed conventions that the enemy ignored. The chamber erupted in protests. Sarah waited for them to quiet down. I understand this is difficult to hear, she continued. Your civilizations have enjoyed peace for 12,000 years. The warfare conventions were written during that peace, refined over millennia of limited conflicts between civilized species who all agreed to the same basic principles. They work beautifully when everyone follows them. She pulled up casualty statistics. But Earth comes from a different background. We never had galactic peace. We had constant war. We learned that the only way to survive is to fight effectively, not honorably. When we arrived and saw how you were fighting the Krethians, we knew exactly what the problem was. And what was that? Felthor asked. The being's crystalline body now pulsing with deep blue curiosity. You were treating an existential threat like a sporting match, Sarah said. You were following rules designed for limited conflicts between rational actors. The Krethians are not rational actors. They're a natural disaster in biological form. Fighting them with ceremony and honor is like trying to stop a tsunami by being polite to it. Commander Jakthar rose from his seat. Sarah noticed that he had been quiet throughout the proceedings. Unusual for the normally vocal commander. The colonel speaks truth, Jakthar said, his voice rough. I lost my homeworld's outer colonies to the Krethians. I watched billions die while we followed the conventions. We issued formal challenges that were ignored. We waited the mandatory evacuation periods while the swarm consumed those trying to flee. We restricted our weapons yields to preserve infrastructure, and the Krethians destroyed that infrastructure anyway. He turned to face the full council. When the humans arrived, I was offended by their tactics. No formal challenges. No honor, no restraint. But in 6 months, they accomplished what we could not in 3 years. They stopped the swarm, they saved my people. Thane stood, his forearms crossed. At what cost? They showed our youth that victory can be won through savagery. They corrupted the very concept of civilized warfare. Sarah met his gaze. War Master Thane, may I ask you a question? Proceed. Your species has fought in many conflicts, correct? All following the Galactic Warfare Conventions? Of course. The Praetorian Dominion has never violated the conventions. And in those conflicts, what was at stake? Thane seemed confused by the question. Territorial disputes. Trade rights. Colonial claims. Exactly, Sarah said. Limited objectives. Conflicts where both sides could afford to lose because nothing truly vital was at risk. Tell me, War Master, has your species ever faced extinction? The chamber fell silent. Have you ever fought a war where defeat meant the complete annihilation of your civilization? Sarah pressed. Where the enemy would not accept surrender, would not take prisoners, would not stop until everything you loved was destroyed. Thane said nothing. Humanity has, Sarah continued quietly, multiple times. We've stood on the edge of extinction and fought our way back. We've faced enemies who wanted complete victory, total dominance, absolute destruction, and we learned that in those circumstances, honor is a luxury you cannot afford. She pulled up more footage, but this time it was different. It showed human medics treating wounded Krethian prisoners, human engineers rebuilding infrastructure on liberated worlds, Human soldiers distributing food and medical supplies to refugees. You accuse us of abandoning all rules, Sarah said. But look at this. We never targeted civilians. We never used weapons of mass destruction on populated areas. We never tortured prisoners or executed the wounded. We followed the rules that matter, the ones designed to protect the innocent. You simply ignored the rules about how to conduct warfare honorably, Velthor observed. Yes, Sarah agreed, because those rules were getting people killed. Your conventions prioritize honor over effectiveness. Our rules prioritize protecting civilians over protecting warriors. She pulled up side-by-side casualty comparisons. In the 3 years before human involvement, civilian casualties averaged 14 million per month. In the 6 months of human military operations, civilian casualties dropped to 1.5 million per month. Military casualties across all coalition forces decreased by 72%. The numbers hung in the air, undeniable. We didn't make war more savage, Sarah said. We made it more effective. We ended it faster. We saved lives by fighting to win rather than fighting to look noble. She deactivated the holographic display and looked around at the assembled council. Members, you can vote to punish humanity for violating your conventions. That is your right. But before you do, ask yourselves this question. When the next existential threat emerges, and it will, do you want to face it with rules designed for honor? Or do you want to face it with rules designed for survival? The chamber fell into a heavy silence. Sarah could see council members looking at each other, uncertainty written across dozens of alien faces. She had planted the seed of doubt. Now she needed to see if it would grow. The council chambers hummed with quiet conversation as the members debated among themselves. High Magistrate Velthor called for order, the crystalline being's body flashing bright white for attention. The council will now hear from those who wish to speak before the final vote, Velthor announced. War Master Thane was the first to stand. He had been waiting for this moment, Sarah could tell. His forearms spread wide in a gesture of address. I have listened to Colonel Chen's arguments, Thane began, his voice carrying easily through the vast chamber. She speaks of effectiveness and survival. She shows us numbers and statistics. She tells us that human methods saved lives. He paused, letting his words settle. But she does not address the fundamental question. What are we willing to become in order to survive? Thane activated his own holographic display. Footage appeared of human soldiers in combat. The images had been edited, carefully selected to show the most brutal moments. A soldier laughing while firing his weapon, another using a knife in close combat, a squad singing as they advanced through a battlefield littered with Krethian corpses. Look at this, Thane said. Look at what we are being asked to accept as normal. These soldiers enjoy violence. They laugh at death. They have no respect for their enemies, no honor in their hearts. This is not warfare. This is butchery given military colors. More footage appeared. Sarah recognized some of it from Sergeant Rodriguez's missions. Night raids where human forces struck without warning. Ambushes that killed Krethian units before they could respond. Psychological warfare broadcast designed to disrupt Krethian hive communications and induce panic. The humans claim they saved lives, Thane continued. But at what cost to our civilization? We have spent 12,000 years elevating warfare beyond mere killing. We have made it a test of strategy and honor. We have rules that ensure even in conflict we remain civilized beings. He gestured at the footage. This is what we lose if we accept human methods. We lose ourselves. We become no better than the monsters we fight. Several council members nodded in agreement. Sarah felt her stomach tighten. Thane was making an effective emotional argument. The Praetorian Dominion has fought in 17 conflicts over the past 2,000 years, Thane said. In every single one we maintained our honor. We followed the conventions. Yes, some of those wars lasted longer than they might have otherwise. Yes, we took casualties that more brutal tactics might have prevented. But we preserved what makes us civilized. We proved that victory means nothing if you lose your soul in achieving it. He turned to face Sarah directly. Colonel Chen asks what we are willing to do to survive. I answer that survival means nothing if we become monsters in the process. I vote that humanity be classified as a Category 9 threat and quarantined from galactic civilization until they learn to fight like civilized beings rather than savage animals. The chamber erupted in discussion. Sarah saw several council members signaling their agreement with Thane. She had expected this, but seeing it still sent a chill through her. Felthor called for order again. Does anyone else wish to speak before the vote? Sarah raised her hand. I have one final statement, Magistrate. Very well. The council recognizes Colonel Chen. Sarah stepped forward. For a long moment, she just looked around at the assembled species. Then slowly, she smiled. It was a distinctly human expression, showing teeth in a way that many species found unsettling. Several council members shifted uncomfortably. War Master Thane asks what we are willing to become in order to survive, Sarah said. He suggests that following your combat rules is a measure of civilization. That honor in warfare proves moral superiority. She paused, her smile fading into something more serious. Let me tell you about honor, she continued. On my world we had many wars. In one of them, millions of people were systematically murdered. Men, women, children, killed not in battle but in camps designed for industrial-scale death. The people doing this killing believed they were honorable. They followed rules. They kept detailed records. They were efficient and organized. The chamber was completely silent now. After that war ended, the survivors created the Geneva Conventions I showed you earlier. And do you know what the most important rule was? The rule that superseded all others? She pulled up a single line of text, displayed large enough for everyone to see. The ends do not justify the means, but the means must be effective enough to achieve righteous ends. We learned that having rules isn't enough, Sarah said. The rules must serve the right purpose. War Master Thane says we should preserve our civilization even if it means losing wars. I say a civilization that loses wars doesn't get preserved. It gets destroyed. She activated her own display showing different footage. Human medics treating wounded enemies. Engineers rebuilding destroyed infrastructure. Soldiers distributing food to starving civilians on liberated worlds. You want to know why we violated your combat rules? Sarah said, her voice growing stronger. That's why we wrote our own. The words hung in the air. Our rules are simple, Sarah continued. Protect civilians. Complete the mission. Bring our soldiers home. Everything else is negotiable based on what the situation requires. We don't fight for honor. We fight to end the fighting as quickly and effectively as possible. She pulled up new data, statistics that the council hadn't seen before. In the 6 months of human operations against the Creathians, civilian casualties didn't just decrease. The rate of civilian deaths dropped by 89% compared to coalition operations.
Do you know why?
She highlighted specific battles. Because we didn't wait 72 hours to evacuate planets while the enemy advanced. We went in immediately, established secure zones, and got civilians out under armed protection. We didn't designate combat zones and hope the enemy would respect them. We made sure the fighting happened far away from population centers. More statistics appeared. Military casualties among coalition forces dropped by 72%. Why? Because we didn't send formal challenges that telegraphed our attacks. We didn't restrict our weapons yields in ways that made battles drag on for weeks. We hit hard, hit fast, and ended engagements before they could turn into grinding attrition. She turned to face Thane directly. You say we fight like savages. I say we fight like people who understand what war actually is. It's not a sport. It's not a test of honor. It's organized violence in pursuit of political objectives. The only moral way to conduct war is to win it as quickly as possible with the minimum necessary casualties. Sarah pulled up footage of the Creathian swarm attacking a coalition colony. The insects swarmed over defensive positions, ignoring all attempts at communication, killing everything in their path. The Creathians didn't care about your rules, she said. They never would have cared. They're driven by biological imperatives that don't include concepts of honor or civilization. Fighting them with ceremony was like trying to negotiate with a forest fire. She switched to footage of human forces engaging the Creathians. The tactics were brutal, yes, but also precise. Surgical strikes against hive structures, rapid deployments that cut off Creathian advances, relentless pressure that never gave the enemy time to adapt. We didn't abandon all rules, Sarah said. We abandoned your rules because they were designed for a different kind of warfare. We followed our own rules, the ones we developed over 10,000 years of learning what actually works. She deactivated the display and stood in silence for a moment. You can vote to quarantine Earth, she said quietly. You can call us savages and monsters. You can maintain your conventions and feel morally superior. But when the next threat emerges and you lose millions because you're more concerned with fighting honorably than fighting effectively, remember this moment. She looked around at each council member. Remember that humanity offered you a different way, not a savage way, not a dishonorable way, just a more effective way, a way that prioritizes protecting the innocent over protecting the guilty, a way that values victory because victory means safety for your people. Sarah smiled again, that unsettling human expression. You want to know the real difference between your rules and ours? She asked. Your rules are designed for wars you can afford to lose. Our rules are designed for wars we cannot afford to lose. Choose wisely which kind of war you think is coming next. She stepped back, her statement complete. The chamber was silent for a long moment. Then Commander Jackthar rose from his seat. Slowly, deliberately, he removed his council badge and placed it on his console. I hereby resign my position on this council, Jackthar announced, and I formally request to join Earth's military advisory program. The humans saved my people. They saved us because they understood something we had forgotten, that sometimes survival requires more than honor. It requires victory. Other council members began to murmur. Sarah saw uncertainty spreading through the chamber like ripples in water. Velthor's crystalline body flashed bright red, then blue, then settled on a pulsing purple. The being was experiencing something humans would recognize as profound internal conflict. The council will recess to consider all testimony, Velthor finally announced. We will reconvene for the vote in 1 standard hour. As the council members filed out, Sarah felt General Webb's hand on her shoulder. That was quite a speech, he said quietly. The hour felt like an eternity. Sarah sat in the preparation room reviewing her speech in her mind, wondering if she had said too much or not enough. General Webb stood by the window, looking out at the alien cityscape beyond. The capital world of the Galactic Council was beautiful, built from technologies and materials Earth could barely comprehend. Do you think they'll vote for quarantine? One of the aides asked nervously. Probably, Webb said. We challenged everything they believe about themselves. People don't like that. Then why did we do it? The aide asked. Sarah looked up. Because being liked matters less than being right. If they quarantine us, at least we tried to teach them. Maybe next time they'll remember. The summons came precisely 1 hour later. Sarah and her team returned to the council chamber. The atmosphere had changed. There was tension in the air, but also something else. Uncertainty. Maybe even hope. High Magistrate Velthor's crystalline body glowed with steady white light as the council reconvened. The being's voice echoed through the chamber. The council has deliberated. We have heard testimony from both the accusers and the accused. We have reviewed extensive evidence. Now we must vote. Sarah stood straight, hands clasped behind her back. She was ready for whatever came. Before we vote, Velthor continued, I must share something. During our recess, I accessed the historical archives. I reviewed records of the past 12,000 years of galactic conflict. Colonel Chen was correct about one thing. All of our conflicts have been limited in scope. Territorial disputes, trade disagreements, colonial claims. Wars where both sides could afford to lose because nothing vital was truly at risk. The magistrate's body pulsed with deep blue light. The Krathian swarm was different. For the first time in recorded history, we faced an enemy that threatened our existence. An enemy that could not be reasoned with, could not be negotiated with, could not be stopped by conventional means. And we were losing. Velthor turned to face Sarah directly. Humanity did violate the galactic warfare conventions. The evidence is undeniable. The question before us is whether those violations constitute crimes or necessary adaptations to unprecedented circumstances. The chamber was silent. The council votes, Velthor announced. One by one, holographic indicators appeared above each council member's position. Sarah watched them appear, her heart pounding. Green for acquittal, red for conviction. The first few votes were red. Sarah's stomach sank. Then green indicators began appearing. More green. The votes were splitting. When the final vote was cast, the tally appeared in the air above the chamber. 28 green, 19 red. By majority vote, the council finds that humanity's actions, while technically in violation of established conventions, were justified by the unprecedented nature of the Krathian threat, Velthor announced. The charges are dismissed. Sarah felt the tension drain from her body. They had won, but Velthor wasn't finished. However, the council recognizes that this situation has revealed a critical flaw in our established warfare doctrine. Our conventions were designed for a galaxy at peace, not a galaxy under existential threat. We must adapt. The magistrate's body began cycling through colors, a sign of complex emotional processing. Therefore, the Council proposes the creation of a new military framework, the hybridization doctrine. This doctrine will incorporate human tactical flexibility while maintaining core humanitarian protections. A joint committee will be formed to draft new warfare regulations that prioritize effectiveness in protecting civilians over ceremonial honor. Sarah couldn't believe what she was hearing. Furthermore, Velthor continued, the Council votes to establish the Galactic Combined Forces, a new military division that will integrate human strategic doctrine with coalition technology and resources. All member species are invited to participate. Humanity will provide tactical advisors to every fleet. War Master Thane stood, his forearms crossed. I vote against this proposal. It legitimizes barbarism. Your objection is noted, Velthor said, but the majority has spoken. The galaxy must change or face extinction the next time we encounter a threat like the Krethians. 6 months passed. General Sarah Chen, promoted after the tribunal, stood in an observation deck overlooking a joint training facility. Below, soldiers from a dozen different species practiced tactics that would have been unthinkable a year ago. Night operations, rapid deployment, coordinated strikes. A Veltarian squad moved through an urban combat simulation, their movements precise and efficient. Their instructor was a human marine who would have been court-martialed under the old rules for the tactics he was teaching. Commander Jack Thar, now wearing a hybrid uniform that combined Veltarian and Earth insignia, joined Sarah at the window. Strange, isn't it, he said. A year ago I would have been horrified by what I see down there. Now I understand it's necessary. How are your people adjusting? Sarah asked. Better than expected. The younger soldiers adapt quickly. The older ones struggle with abandoning traditions, but even they see the value. He paused. We received word yesterday. The Voidborn have emerged in the Rim territories. Sarah felt a chill. The Voidborn were another aggressive species similar to the Krethians, but possibly worse. How bad? She asked. 3 colony worlds attacked in the first week, but this time the response was different. Jackthar pulled up a tactical display. Coalition forces didn't wait for formal challenges. They didn't designate combat zones. They deployed immediately with full force authorization. Human tactical advisors coordinated the response. Sarah studied the reports. What were the results? The Voidborn advance was stopped in 3 weeks. Civilian casualties were minimal. Enemy forces were completely neutralized. Jakthar's scales rippled with what Sarah had learned to recognize as satisfaction. Total time to resolution 3 weeks. Compare that to 3 years of fighting the Krethians under the old rules. The new doctrine is working, Sarah observed. Yes, though War Master Thane still protests in every council session. He calls it the corruption of galactic civilization. He's not entirely wrong, Sarah admitted. We did change the galaxy. The question is whether we changed it for the better. My people are alive because of that change, Jackthar said. That is answer enough for me. Below them, the training exercise concluded. Soldiers from different species congratulated each other, shared tactical observations, learned from their mistakes. It was something that would never have happened under the old system. Sarah's communication device chimed. It was General Webb calling from Earth. General Chen, we have a situation. The Praetorian Dominion has formally requested human tactical advisors. Apparently they lost a border skirmish using traditional methods and want to learn our approach. Sarah smiled. Even Thane's people are coming around. Progress, Webb said. Slow but real. How are things at the training center? Good. The Joint Operations Doctrine is being adopted faster than expected. We've got 17 species participating now. Excellent. Keep me updated. Webb out. Sarah turned back to the window. Jackthar was still watching the soldiers below. You know what the strangest part is? He asked. The humans didn't just teach us how to fight more effectively. You taught us that rules should serve people, not the other way around. That tradition matters less than results. That honor means protecting others, not protecting yourself. Those are hard lessons, Sarah said. The hardest ones usually are. 3 months later, the Galactic Council formally adopted the Terran Doctrine. A plaque was installed in the council chambers right beside the original warfare conventions. It read, The Terran Doctrine, to protect the innocent, We must defeat the guilty. Victory with honor is ideal. Victory without honor is acceptable. Defeat with honor is worthless. The purpose of warfare is not glory, but peace. We fight not because we love violence, but because we love what violence can protect. The ceremony was attended by representatives from all member species. Even War Master Thane was present, though he stood in the back and said nothing. Sarah was asked to give a speech. She kept it short. A year ago, humanity stood accused of violating the rules of civilized warfare. We were called savages and monsters. Some of you voted to quarantine Earth because you believed we had abandoned all principles of honor. She looked around at the assembled diplomats and military leaders. Today, I stand before you as proof that survival and civilization are not mutually exclusive. You can fight effectively and still protect the innocent. You can abandon ceremonial honor and still maintain your moral principles. The question was never whether to follow rules. It was which rules to follow. She gestured to the plaque. These new rules prioritize what matters: protecting civilians, completing missions, and bringing soldiers home. They don't promise glory or honor. They promise effectiveness and results, because the greatest honor is not in how you fight, but in who you save by fighting. The ceremony concluded with the activation of the Galactic Combined Forces headquarters. The building's exterior displayed flags from all participating species, with Earth's flag prominently positioned alongside the Galactic Council's banner. That night, Sarah stood on a balcony overlooking the capital city. General Webb joined her, carrying 2 glasses of Earth whiskey that he'd smuggled past customs.